all-new Dr. Phil from our studio before the pandemic. He and his then-girlfriend did the time.
33 years in prison.
But he swears...
Did you kill the Haysums?
Absolutely not.
He didn't do the crime.
This is his first interview as a free man.
Other men left their DNA at the crime scene.
His blood was not there. It wasn't his DNA.
I was stupid enough to give a false confession.
Tell me why. Today's going to be a changing day in your life. You've never had anybody working harder to bring you to the threshold of change than right now. Well, Derek and Nancy Haysum were found brutally murdered one night in March 1985. Now, both bodies were tattered with stab wounds, and their throats had been cut from one end to the other. Now, their small-town community in Virginia was left in shock as detectives scrambled to solve the mystery of these murders. Now, authorities claim all the evidence pointed to the Haysums' daughter, Elizabeth, and her younger German boyfriend, Jens Soering. Now, Jens was convicted of 2 counts of murder and given 2 life sentences. Elizabeth was convicted as an accessory and sentenced to 90 years in prison. Now, Elizabeth still maintains Jens killed her parents. But just 3 weeks ago, both Elizabeth and Jens were paroled and set to be deported. Take a look.
Jens Soering and Elizabeth Haysum, who were convicted of the 1985 murders of her parents, were today both granted parole.
The killings of Derek and Nancy Haysum at their home in 1985 will long be remembered for the story of college lovers from UVA who were eventually sent to prison.
The jury found the defendant guilty of first-degree murder.
After initially confessing, Jens Soering maintained his innocence. Soering and Haysum will now be turned over to ICE, with no chance for either to return to the United States. Good news for Soering, but not for those seeking to know what really happened.
Well, it's a fascinating tale with claims of love, lies, and betrayal that landed a young man with his whole life ahead of him behind bars. Now, as you just heard, Jens did confess to the murders, but then recanted just before the 1990 trial. And yet, he was convicted. And he has spent 33 years behind bars for a crime he says he did not commit. Well, we sent our cameras to Jens, who was waiting for deportation in an immigration detention center.
The crime happened on March 30th, 1985. The police figured out that they better take a closer look at Elizabeth. And when we went back to college in the fall of 1985, they did, in fact, pull her in and were very hostile to her. And that was the first warning. And then the police also asked to talk to me, and that was the final warning. We were convinced that the police would basically right on her heels. We thought she would be the obvious suspect. It was known that she had a bad relationship with her parents, and she had a history of drug abuse. So who is the police going to come after but their junkie daughter, right? And then this idea flopped into my lap. I'll tell the police I did it. My father was a German diplomat, so I had a diplomatic passport with a diplomatic visa in it. So I thought I had diplomatic immunity. And I told her, the worst that will happen to me is that I will get sent back to Germany, and then they're going to put me in a juvenile prison. Under German law, I was still a juvenile. And I was willing to go to prison for her, in a German juvenile prison for 10 years, to save her.
Jens says the police were eager to believe his story, even though his confession didn't match many of the details at the crime scene.
My case is a little bit different from many false confession cases. In most false confession cases, the police isolate a suspect and pressure him, and then after days, the suspect gives up and just tells the police whatever they want to hear. That was not the case with me. I went into that police station when they brought me there, intending to give a false confession. We were taken into custody on June 5th, 1986. I was interrogated for a total of 9 times over 4 days. During my confession, I made a number of serious mistakes. I got Nancy Hasem's clothing completely wrong. I said she was wearing jeans, but in fact, she was wearing a long housecoat with pajamas. I told the police that I cut their throats, and I specifically said I did not stab them. But in fact, they were stabbed, I believe, 38 times. Again, the real killer would have remembered stabbing 2 people 38 times, but I got that wrong. Somebody washed off blood in the showers. This was nowhere in my confession because I didn't know about it. Another crucial error in the story is there were 4 blood types found at the crime scene. The 2 victims' blood types, A and AB, and then also blood type O and blood type B. The false confession I told them was that I killed Derek and Nancy Hasem by myself. So there should really have only been 3 blood types at the crime scene. There was no explanation in my story for the 4th blood type. The police should have been very suspicious about my false confession, but the police wanted to solve the case at the expense of getting it right.
Okay, now Jens was paroled. He wasn't pardoned. And so when they let him out of prison, they said, you're going to be deported. You're out of here. But it wasn't right away. He spent 3 weeks with ICE holding him in a detention center. He finally landed in Germany about 6 hours ago. And he landed at the airport and went straight to a satellite uplink center where he is now and is going to talk to us for the first American interview as a free man. Jens, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. I'm just doing wonderful. This is the best day of my life, and I'm so happy.
It's got to feel just amazing to breathe fresh air in your home country for the first time in over 33 years. Tell me what's going through your mind and heart right now.
It's just astonishing. It's just astonishing. I arrived and the weather was so beautiful, and for the first time in 33 years, 6 months and 25 days, I was walking around without handcuffs, without leg irons, you know, free.
Well, thank you for spending some of that time with us.
Me
now,
right there.
when you went
that's me
in
at the airport.
Yeah, when you went in, the world was a whole lot different than it is now. Did it look different to you when you got off that airplane and started going across the city?
Well, as a matter of fact, back then there were 2 Germanys. Germany had not yet united. I was a West German when I was arrested, so I actually, for the first time, visited a united Germany.
Let me just ask you straight up for the record. Did you or did you not kill the Hasems?
Oh, absolutely not. Absolutely not. No way. Now we know as an absolute fact from the DNA evidence that there were at least 2 other men who left their DNA at the crime scene, and we know that neither one of these men could have been me. I only found out about that when I was in prison, when it was much too late.
When we come back, we're going to find out why police did believe Jens' confession, and I'm going to ask someone who says that he knows exactly why they did. We'll be right back.
I was a small white guy in a prison system that is full of experienced criminals who are a lot bigger than me. I was very nearly raped. What could I do to protect myself?
And later, Jens, do you believe that at the time Elizabeth was in love with you, or do you think now that she was playing you from the start?
Jens Soering and Elizabeth Hasem were granted parole, and tonight the investigator who helped put them behind bars decades ago is speaking out.
Common sense tells you that the only 2 people that benefited from the death of her parents was Soering and Elizabeth. There was never anybody else that had any motive, means, or opportunity to kill the Hasems.
Despite the release, Gardner is satisfied, especially knowing Soering's pardon was not granted.
It feels pretty good to be vindicated after all these years that I was actually right all along.
Well, Jens Soering claims he was blinded by love when he made a false confession to Virginia investigator Ricky Gardner. Now, he says he lied and confessed to murdering his girlfriend Elizabeth's parents, Nancy and Derek Haysom, in 1985. So how did a 19-year-old German academic scholarship winner survive so many years in prison? Because you would think he's not exactly the prison type. Take a look.
Prison is just about as bad as you think it's going to be. One of the first things I saw in prison is that I watched somebody else get raped. I was very nearly raped myself. I was a small white guy in a prison system that is full of experienced criminals who are a lot bigger than me, so I was like a natural victim. What could I do to protect myself? I talked to two big black guys who were running a small-scale loan sharking operation, which is called running a store box in prison, which basically involves loaning out cigarettes and food. You loan out 2 items and you get 3 back. So I told them about checking your customers' creditworthiness, cartel formation, we should work together and not against each other. The Pareto principle, you make 80% of your profits from 20% of your customers. So let's focus on the best 20% of our customers and not the 80% who are not going to pay us back. And then the key thing was customer relations. They ran their loan sharking operations, their store box, on the principle that they just threatened people and frightened them. And I told them, that's not the way to run a business. You've got to have good customer relations. Be nice to the guys. And it worked. I had achieved some kind of status in the prison hierarchy. And because these economic and business principles work, we ended up making money together. So it was successful on every level.
Well, Jens had a team of people helping him become a free man, including Jason Flom, a music executive best known for working with the Rolling Stones and Katy Perry. Now, Jason also dedicated his life to advocating for people like Jens. Another advocate is Sheriff Chip Harding, who spent over 600 hours on Jens' case trying to prove his innocence. So thank both of you for being here. I really appreciate it. Before we go on, let both of you say hello to Jens as a free man.
Jens, how are you?
Jason, Chip, hi there. It's so good to see you. It's so good to see you. Hey, thank you guys. Thank you so much. I would still be sitting in prison without you. You're just the best. Thank you. Thank you.
At what point in the process did you make up your mind that he, in fact, was innocent?
Everything I saw in the news, he confessed to it. His girlfriend said he did it, and I think he said something about they had footprints and blood that belonged to him. So I said, give me everything you've got, and I took it home, and over the weekend, spread it out over my dining room table, and I said, oh, my gosh. And that's when I got involved in it. 200 hours later, I wrote a 19-page letter to the governor, and I felt like it all tended to support his innocence, not his guilt.
Well, you said in your confession that you were there for 45 minutes before you killed them, and apparently a lot would have had to happen at 45 minutes because you said that you had several drinks with Derek and Nancy. Nancy prepared dinner, then you all ate dinner, and then you killed them. So this had to be like a speed date before the killing, because in 45 minutes a lot had to take place if in fact that was the time frame.
What you just mentioned is a really key thing. It is clear from the crime scene that the killer spent a lot of time there. And if somebody spends a lot of time, they're gonna leave physical evidence. And there is a lot of physical evidence at the crime scene, but none of it's mine.
It wasn't his DNA. His blood was not there. His fingerprints were not there.
Right.
You know, it's because he wasn't there. I think any lay person can look at this and say, it doesn't make any damn sense.
The motivation behind all of this is really interesting, and I'm going to talk about that after the break. He was the nerd, no offense, Jens, and she was the it girl. We're going to talk about their relationship and the intrigue behind all of this. It reads like a novel. We'll be right back.
Once I went to state prison in Virginia, I was not facing execution. Technically, I was eligible for parole. But number one, Virginia does not parole double murderers. And number two, I continued to insist that I was innocent. And you only get parole anywhere if you tell the parole board that you did it and you're sorry. And I knew I could never do that because Even though I'm sorry the Haysams died, it was not my responsibility. I didn't do it. So I would never make parole, so I expected that I would die in prison unless I could fight my way out.
Jens, do you believe that at the time Elizabeth was in love with you, or do you think now that she was playing you from the start?
Elizabeth and I fell in love at the very beginning of December 1984. And she wrote me these letters where she said that I was the first man she had ever truly loved. And these diaries that I then saw 30 years later showed that just a week after she made these declarations of love to me, she was on a skiing vacation in Yugoslavia and had sex with 3 other men.
At one point, the two of you fled to Europe. Tell me why.
They called her in for questioning in the fall, and after that, they called me in for questioning, and then we decided, clearly, they figured it out, we need to go on the run, we need to leave the country, and we left.
Well, next, we're going to meet a man who says Ricky Gardner's interrogation was thin and full of gaps. We'll be right back. Jens, you said you felt really stupid in this process until the doctor weighed in.
I've always thought that I was the only guy stupid enough to voluntarily give a false confession.
This is The Secret. Robin McGraw's podcast is full of secrets. That's hot. And she's sharing them with all her friends.
That's a great idea.
We can always learn something. Spilling tea on everything from pop culture to living your best life.
Wow, that is so powerful. Be the hero of your own life.
I've Got a Secret with Robin McGraw.
What an introduction.
This interview is going to get really lit.
Available on Stitcher and Apple Podcasts.
Closed captioning provided by...
Facing leaks takes strength. So here's to the strong who trust in our performance and comfortable, long-lasting protection. Because your strength is supported by ours. Depend. The only thing stronger than us is you.
Inside your eye, there's an everyday battle against life's daily stressors, like smartphones, sunlight, and screens. Just one Ocuvite eye vitamin a day replenishes key nutrients that help protect the health of your eyes. Take Ocuvite. Take care of your eyes.
Elizabeth Haysam was the first woman I loved. She hurt me really badly. So yeah, because I would like to have children, I would presumably have to have a romantic relationship with a woman. And I want to, because I think as part of healing, I think it would be really important for me to overcome the trauma of what Elizabeth did to my heart.
Jens Soring was just 19 years old when he says he gave a false confession to a crime that he did not commit. Dr. Andy Griffiths is an expert in police interrogations with 30 years' experience as a police officer in the United Kingdom. He was asked to analyze Jens' confession to Ricky Gardner and give his expert opinion on it. Now, Dr. Griffiths is joining us on Skype from London. Doctor, thank you for joining us. I really appreciate you weighing in on this.
Thank you very much for having me.
Why do you say that Ricky Gardner's interrogation was thin and full of gaps?
Well, because the questioning is in no way thorough. The main problem with it is that it suffers from quite a common trait amongst poor interrogations, and that's that Ricky Gardner has made his mind up before he started the interrogation. And that mindset clouded his behavior and the way he approached the questioning of Jens.
If he had had the mindset of challenging this, for example, like if he had gone into it like you would if you were trying to break an alibi, this would have had a very different outcome. Would you agree?
Well, that's a good way of looking at it. But what you're looking to do in every interrogation or interview is to check the facts and to probe further into things that people do say to you, whether they're denials or admissions, and seek to check them out with other information. And that was lacking in this whole process.
Mm-hmm. Why do people give false confessions?
The collective wisdom on that now is that you've got the role of police behaviour. So there's what's known as coerced false confessions. This is where basically interrogators bully someone into admitting something, even though those people know they haven't done it. The next section is rather more interesting, as coerced, internalized false confessions. And that's where, through the techniques of the police, the person being interrogated actually comes to believe they've committed the crime. And then the third section are the voluntary false confessions. And this is where people, without any coercive influence from the police officers, admit to something. And that's the category Jens falls into.
And Jens, you said you felt really stupid in this process until the doctor weighed in.
Until I read Dr. Griffith's report, I've always thought that I was kind of like a freak, the only guy stupid enough to voluntarily give a false confession. But one of the things that Dr. Griffiths pointed out in his report was that there was research showing that among teenagers, and remember, I was 19 at the time, among teenagers, the leading reason for giving a false confession is to protect somebody else.
Jens, where would you put yourself on the bitterness scale if 10 is as bitter as you can get and 1 is, I'm just not going to go there? Jason, in all the work that you've done, and Lord, you've been involved in engineering the release of so many falsely convicted people off death row, not just in prison, off death row. You see this happen at a really troubling rate with people that don't have proper counsel, don't have the wherewithal, and really get lost in the system and confess to things that they just flat didn't do.
We know that false confessions are most common among people who are under the age of 25, which is when the brain fully develops, as you know so well. And we know that false confessions happen for a variety of reasons. But among them are just that people want that interrogation to stop. Ironically, innocent people waive their Miranda rights almost all the time because they think they'll just go in and tell the truth and go home. And that's a bad idea. If you ever get picked up for something that you didn't do, just the only words you need to know are I want a lawyer. And then you stop talking. Because they can trick you, and they can use mind games, and they can lie. They're allowed to lie in America in the interrogation room. They can say, listen, Doc, I'm sorry, but we got your fingerprints on the gun. We got somebody next door who says he saw you do it. We got your DNA. They can say whatever they want. They can say, the spaceship landed and took video of you doing the damn crime. So the fact is that with this mismatch, right? When you have a young person like Jens was, but he's, again, not a coerced confession, but when you have a young person in that situation in a cold room with no possibility of getting out, and they just become so desperate that they start to think that the only way they can get out of there is to cooperate. Just because somebody confessed to a crime, you must look at other evidence before you convict that person, because they may have falsely confessed, just like so many other people did.
Jens, where would you put yourself on the bitterness scale if 10 is as bitter as you can get and 1 is, I'm just not going to go there?
I think a 2. And I wouldn't even call it bitterness. Maybe it's a 1. I've mentioned earlier, I'm a little disappointed that I did not get a pardon, that I only got parole. But I understand the political realities. You saw yourself with the interview with Ricky Gardner. It's very difficult to admit for Virginia that they screwed up a case that is as high profile as mine. It would make the whole state look bad, frankly. So I get it. I get it. Parole was probably the best and maybe the only politically possible way to do this. And so, I wouldn't say it's bitterness, but there's a little bit of disappointment there. But apart from that, I'm just super happy. I'm overjoyed to be free. Here in Germany, everybody understands the DNA. And, at least in my own country, there are no questions that I'm innocent. and I've gotten so much love and so much sympathy over here, and I'm so grateful. And I can't wait for all of my American friends, like Jason Flom and Chip Harding and all the many others, to come visit me here in Germany. I'm really looking forward to that. And hey, Dr. Phil, I'm inviting you to come over too if you want. Bring your camera crew, come visit me. We'll have a blast. I just went to the house where I'm going to be living. Just the kitchen is 4 times as big as the double cell that I spent the last 10 years in. It's, you know, wow.
Jens, let me ask you, you're in Germany, you're free. What's next for you?
First of all, for the next 3 or 4 weeks, I really need to just arrive psychologically in freedom. You know, I spent 3 decades in here, my entire adult life. I was 19 when I came to prison. Now I'm 53. So I have to learn simple things like, you know, when you go up to a door, I don't have to wait for a guard to unlock it and let me out. I can actually open the door myself. It's even things like that. Making simple decisions about my own life. You know, instead of just being given some slop in a prison chow hall, now I can actually choose what I'm going to eat. And I have no idea what I'm going to choose, frankly.
Being in prison where your world is so small, now that you're out, is it overwhelming to you?
Well, you know, I literally came here almost straight from the airport. I just went to the house where I'm going to be living, and I looked at the kitchen, right? And just the kitchen in the house where I'm going to be living, I measured it out, is 4 times as big as the double cell that I spent the last 10 years in. You know, it's mind-blowing. It's mind-boggling. It's you know, wow. It's going to take a minute. It's going to take a minute.
Are you thinking about things like driving and dating and any of those things that have crossed your mind?
Not actually driving or dating, actually. You know, in prison, there are no trees. And so I have not been near a tree in 33 years. And I have already been near some trees. I haven't yet touched one, but for some reason, that's something that really means something to me. I want to be around trees and feel nature, right? In prison, the only nature you get is the cockroaches that are trying to eat your leftover food off the cell floor. You know, that's about the extent of nature in prison. And I'm a fitness freak, so I ran a lot and lifted weights a lot in prison. But on a prison rec yard, you always run in small circles, and I really want to run in a straight line. That's something I really want to do.
Coming up, I want to share a letter that I received from Rodney Reed. Plus, his attorney gives us an update on what's next for Rodney since his stay of execution. We'll be right back. You may be aware that I've been very involved in the case of Rodney Reed. He has been on death row for 22.5 years, but has always maintained his innocence in the 1996 murder and rape of 19-year-old Stacy Stites. Now, I recently interviewed Rodney on death row and made it my mission to bring his case into the spotlight. Here's a short recap about Rodney.
On April 23rd, 1996, the body of Stacy Stites was recovered off a dirt road. They say Rodney Reed took Stacy to a wooded area where he raped her and strangled her with the leather belt. Rodney Reed is in jail, scheduled to die November 20th for Stacy's murder.
The prosecution told the jury that Rodney was the murderer. But what if it's not that simple? Did you rape and murder Stacy Stites?
No, I absolutely did not. I
didn't do this crime.
Stacy and I hung out at work. She wasn't that excited to get married because she was sleeping with a black guy named Rodney.
So you have no doubt that Stacy was in a relationship with Rodney?
I have no doubt.
This is a female engaged to a white cop.
At the time of her death, Stacy was living with her boyfriend, Jimmy Fennell.
Jimmy Fennell was initially the key suspect in this case.
Did he ever have an inkling that you were in a relationship with her?
He told me, "You gonna pay?"
So it was a clear threat.
I took it that way.
None of this is what was told to the jury.
I don't think it's a question of whether he's guilty or not guilty. I think the question is, has he had a fair trial with a full airing of all of the evidence? And I think the answer to that question is not just no, but hell no.
There is breaking news tonight in Texas. The state's highest criminal court halted the execution of inmate Rodney Reed. New evidence has raised questions about the case.
Are you glad that you've done this interview?
Yes, I am. I appreciate it.
We will stay in touch. Today, you are about to see a few segments we taped in Houston back in January before we were sheltering at home due to the coronavirus pandemic. Recently, the United States Supreme Court declined to hear Rodney Reed's case. However, his death sentence is still on hold while various claims are being considered by the Texas trial court. If the Texas courts uphold Rodney's conviction, he could appeal the decision to the Supreme Court. I had a chance to sit down with Rodney's attorney, Quincy McNeil, to learn more about Rodney's legal situation. When they came to me about this case, the Innocence Project, they said, look, this thing is stuck. Will you help us? So I made a lot of noise about it, and it's been sent back to the trial court.
Right. And let me just be clear, Dr. Phil. So the murder conviction, it is what it is, and it stands. What they have done is the courts have said, you've made a case, Mr. Reed, that information was withheld from you. You've made a case that there has been false testimony. Now we need you to make it in trial. So he is still an individual guilty and on death row, but they're giving us an opportunity to go to a hearing and to the trial to prove his innocence and to prove these constitutional violations.
What are the court's options at this point?
The judge can recommend to the Court of Criminal Appeals, our high court here in Texas, that relief should be granted, and relief would likely be in the form of a new trial. Or he can recommend that relief not be granted. That decision then goes to the high court. Whether for or against us, it goes to the high court, and the high court makes the final determination.
What would you say to those people that are skeptical?
Well, Dr. Phil, I would sort of put the evidence that I have uncovered in really three buckets. The first bucket really is relationship evidence, right? This was critical at trial, because at trial the impression was left with the jury that Rodney and Stacy were strangers. So many of the people who've come forward are individuals who saw them together, folks who have made clear that this idea that they were strangers is pure fiction.
And we're not talking about one person here.
Oh, absolutely. We're talking about 4 or 5 people, 4, 5, 6 people, people who've come out more recently and people who came out in 2014. The other bucket is the bucket that inculpates Jimmy Fennell, and in my mind makes it more likely than not that Jimmy Fennell is the one who committed this crime. One gentleman worked for the Lee County Sheriff's Department. He's come forward saying that Jimmy said something when they were both at Stacy's funeral that you just can't imagine a grieving individual to say, you know, you got what you deserve. Another law enforcement officer came forward, a guy named Wayne Fletcher, and he tells us that about 3 or 4 weeks prior to Stacy's death, Jimmy Fennell exclaimed to him in a private conversation that Jimmy was aware that Stacy was dating a black man. There you have motivating evidence. He's upset, a racial slur was used, a curse word was used, saying she is messing around with a black man. Right. Both of these guys are law enforcement officers. They've got no reason to lie. Right. The other bucket, Dr. Phil, would be the medical science bucket. It's just my opinion that the medical science leaves little to no doubt that Mr. Reed could not have done this, because it makes clear that Stacy died at a different time.
The science supports 100% that she died before midnight.
I think that's exactly right.
The fact that they did have a relationship where they could have been together before,
right.
The fact that the time of death was not what the prosecution says it was, the fact that he had an alibi for the time that the prosecution says the death occurred.
Right.
All of those things, when you add it all up, I don't think he's just not guilty. I think he's innocent. But you certainly get to the standard of being beyond a reasonable doubt.
Yes.
I also had a chance to sit down with Rodney's mother, Sandra, and his brother, Roderick, to get their thoughts on Rodney's case. Here's what they had to say. Are you of the opinion that this will be retried?
I would like to be retried.
You would like to see
get
it tried.
all the evidence out. I want the public to know
the truth.
The truth that he is innocent. But if they let him go, that's fine. I'll get to hold my baby.
So if you had your choice, you would rather there be a retrial than them to just drop the charges? Because I disagree with you.
You do?
Let me tell you why. He's been through the justice system.
Yeah.
Did he get justice?
No,
he did not. To go back again, is he going to get justice a second time? I don't know. But I know if they let him go, he's free.
He's free.
And I feel like he's been exonerated.
Right.
When you have 4 scientific experts, independent experts, that have not gotten together and discussed this among themselves, but independently get together and say, not only is it likely that he didn't do this, it is scientifically impossible for him to have committed this crime. To me, in the court of public opinion, he has been exonerated.
Exonerated, that's true.
Sandra, speak to the mothers in America. What has this meant to you to see your son sitting on death row?
I was in shock, still in shock. I'm still numb, but I'm strong with this truth that's out here. And I would say to mothers in my place to speak out and to tell your story, get your truth out, and someone will hear your truth just as you did. But this has been a nightmare, a long 23-year nightmare.
What's it done to you as his brother?
Watching everything just go on without him, you know, it's a hurting thing for me, you know, my dad, my grandmothers, my family, you know, everybody's passing, and those are opportunities that he will never get again, and it affects me every day. And it's hard. That's my big brother, you know what I mean? And he was there for me. He was the one that helped me learn how to tie my shoes. And when I was in school, he was the one there for me when bullies tried to pick on me, you know. He's always had my back from day one. That's the reason I do as much as I can do. When I go see Rodney, the hardest part of it is leaving him. Every time I go to visit, it has not been any easier for me when I have to leave him there knowing he didn't do these things. That is the hardest part.
We're going to keep this out there till he walks out that door. We're not done.
And I appreciate that.
God bless you. God bless you. God bless you. God bless you. Thank you.
We actually got a message from Rodney Reed. He refers to me as Big Ranch, based on the meme that he's seen about send him to the ranch. So here's a letter that he sent just recently. Dr. Phil, a.k.a. Big Ranch. I am so grateful to you and the advocacy you're doing for me by raising awareness about my case and my innocence. You are the voice of reason and justice I've needed, and I'm so very grateful for you and your team. Please tell my sons, grandchildren, mom, family, Judy and Tiffany that I love them. Please tell the people supporting me how very grateful I am. Please fight lies with the truth and push back against rumors with facts. The reprieve granted on November 15th was only the beginning of our battle. As long as I am on death row, wrongfully convicted for a crime committed by someone else, justice hasn't been served. I look forward to the day I can clear my name, become exonerated, and see justice. I love you. I'm grateful for you, in solidarity and in struggle. Rodney Reed. We are continuing the fight, I can assure you. I want to thank Sheriff Harding, Quincy McNeil, and Jason Flom for bringing these incredible stories to light. And make sure you listen to Jason's podcast, Wrongful Conviction, with Jason Flom. It tell you, once you do, you will never stop listening because they are intriguing and heart-wrenching cases. I want to also thank everyone at Immigration and Customs Enforcement at the Farmville Detention Center for allowing our cameras in to visit with Jens before he was deported. And if you want to know more about Jens' story, go to his website, jensuring.com. And before we go, I sent out a tweet to Rodney's brother, Roderick. The @Dr. Phil team feels privileged to have joined your fight. We have won a critical battle and now must win the war. I will not rest until we all, including a free Rodney, have dinner at my home in L.A. Hashtag free Rodney Reed at Bring Rodney Home, at Innocence, and at It's Jason Flom. Roderick accepted my invite, so we'll find out Rodney's favorite dish and we'll serve it up when he's there. Thank you so much for being here. All right.